All right, so picking up where we left off, I want to talk a little bit about how we can use this logo and prepare it for using in multiple different ways. And there are a couple of things I want to mention really quickly first. In the last video, I had made an adjustment to this bottom piece right here. Let's blow this up into this bottom piece and this bottom piece where the points are. In fact, if we were to take it and look at it, it's going to be the left one right here. So it would be this point right here and this point right here on the bottom. I lifted those up, but one of the things that I did not do in the last video is that I didn't actually go and make the adjustment to the to this mask right here. So if you wanted to do that to make sure that that matched the new points here, and that would be an important thing to do, then you can go and you can right click and you can say select and mask, and you'd have to right click the actual thumbnail for the mask, not the thumbnail for the object. And you would adjust the mask using these tools. Select and masks should be something you're reasonably familiar with, but if not, then one of the things that you can do is just use the brush tool, and then you can always hold down Option to do the reversal of what it is that you're trying to do. I'm going to hit cancel. The other one too is up here in logo filled. You would need to do the same thing up here if you want to be able to use these independently. But if you're following along, you're probably not doing exactly what I'm doing, but if you wanted to pick up my resource file and follow along at this point, you could. So I'm going to provide that to you from this point forward. The other thing too that I need to mention is that in my last video, my image size, if I go here to image size, it was 1800 by, I think it was 1315, 1315. I made a change to my canvas size, not to the image size, but here I went and I made a change to image and then canvas size. And then what I had done, because it was 1315 before, is that I had pressed this button so that it would add the extra pixels to the bottom, and then I changed the 1315 to 1350 and hit OK. And what it did was it added extra to the bottom. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you were to go and look up Instagram standard sizes, you would see that some common sizes are going to be these. And this is also new, but I'll talk about this in a second. So there are a lot of other common sizes for different types of things depending on where you're looking. But in terms of just making basic pictures for Instagram, you can use these as this at the time of my recording in this video, these are the standard sizes. This is something that can change in the future as phone resolutions change and stuff like that. But anyway, so I've got an Insta vertical, and the standard Insta vertical is going to be 1080 by 1350. Well, you might look at this and say, well, wait a second, you said you made yours 1800 wide, and here you're saying it's 1080 wide. Well, I'm going to show you why I'm doing it this way. So I want to just make sure that the height is one of the most common denominators in the way that I want to make an adjustment. So I changed that to make sure it's 1350. And so you can see that as of right now, and I had made these just for to be able to see, and I'll show you how you can make these as well. But this will show me right off the bat if any of my stuff is going to get cut off. The other thing that I could do is then also create another overlay for the most common Instagram image, which is square, which is 1080 by 1080, and that would show me what would get cut off if I put my overlay visibility on here. And again, if you're going to have something horizontal, like in a landscape orientation, while it's on a vertical handheld part of the phone, is 1080 by 566. And so if I view that, you can see that the top spire or the top peak of this mountain gets cut off. So there are some things that we obviously then would need to do to change our logo. And the idea is that if I turn all of these on and they sort of overlap, and you can also do something like this where you take this and you turn the opacity down so you can kind of see where the overlapping areas are. The idea is to make sure that you make something that will fit in the center so that you can have the most versatile file possible. And if you want to be able to do something for instance, like making an Instagram campaign. And you know, whether you're a graphic designer, web designer, you know, especially if you're a web designer, but if you're a fine artist taking this class, as I said before, it's still very important to learn how to create a mark for yourself, if not for a client. And it's also important to understand how to deal with formatting things for current common formats. And even if you watch this later and the sizes are slightly different, you know, like maybe next year they change it or something, the point is that you can always go on the web and you can look up what the most common sizes are. And the thing is, Instagram is here to stay for a while, but at some point it's not going to be the only thing that there is. That's, well, there is already not the only thing that there is, but it is one of the most commonly used marketing tools and communication tools that people use for social media today. And so, but you know, there will be something that'll take its place at some point down the road. And the point of my showing you how to do this stuff is not specifically, here's just how you do it for Instagram, but it's also to kind of think outside the box and look at other ways and other forms of communication and how you can start to think about creating a versatile file system or file type, and a system for creating your file setup so that you can output multiple different things using the same sets of files. And I think that, you know, you can design your campaigns around it, and we'll be showing you how to do a lot of different things that allow you to do that. Okay, so anyway, this is just a way to get started. Now, you might be wondering, well, how did you make all of this? Okay, well, first of all, I want to show you another thing that you can do too. I'm going to keep this open actually to refer to the sizes, but you might look at this and go, why don't I just want to use a crop tool? Why do I have to use this? Well, you don't have to use this thing that I'm showing you, but the thing that's nice about it is that at a glance you can see kind of how your stuff's going to look even while you've got things that are sort of overlapping. And you can see, you know, okay, well, like that looks like that, and then if I turn that off, I've got that, right? You can see how these different things look without actually having to constantly go back and forth and changing your crop presets. I would recommend using your crop presets to actually crop it, output the file, and then jump backwards in your history so that you get back to something that looks like this, and you've got this original PSD file. Okay, something I just did really quickly is I reset my workspace because I realized I was in a weird workspace from something previously that I had done. So so that you don't get confused, if you want to make sure that your workspace is reset and matches mine, you can go up here to Workspace and then choose Essentials. I had been on 3D before, so choose Essentials, and then you can, after that, you can reset the Essentials. And so yours will look like this, but I kind of don't want mine to have the color and swatches and libraries at the top. So what I'll do is I'm going to collapse that, and I'm going to drag my swatches and color panel and libraries, and I'm going to drag them down here. I like my layers at the top, and I'm going to also put like 3D down here, or excuse me, not 3D, properties, and then I'm going to put my history down at the bottom. All right, so it's easy to access, and I think this is where I want to start. So what I'd like for you to do is let's jump back into the layers and we can open this up, and let's take a look at these Instagram sizes that I had put together. And as I said before, you know, you may or may not have these. If I save the file in there, I don't know, but I can show you how to make these. But I want to show you some stuff about crop presets really quickly. So first of all, another thing that you could do to kind of sort of affect something like that is you could go over here to the crop tool, and it's going to automatically start out with the ratio. And this is one of the reasons I needed to also go and reset my workspace, is that the crop tool on a computer will remember the last settings if other people save stuff, and sometimes it can get kind of messed up. And that's what was happening with mine. It kept saying that it was using something, it was using a preset that, and it wasn't correct. So I reset everything in my workspace, and now I'm back to this. So you can do things that are like 1-to-1 square, right? It'll show you how to do that. And remember, this is 1350 tall, so it's automatically going to be 1350 by 1350. You can do 4:5 ratio. And by the way, just so you know, this is the same ratio as the ratio that you would want to use for the vertical Instagram ratio. So even though the pixel dimensions aren't maybe exact, the ratio is correct. Actually, the pixel dimensions would be exact in this case because I've already changed my height to 1350. But if you were in a really big file and you use this, then at least the ratio would be right, and it would always size down properly. And anyway, you've got these different ratios. Now, one of the things I want to show you that you can do is you can also give specific pixel dimensions in width and height by resolution. So if we go to that, then what we can do is we can type in, let's just start with the first example that I showed you was 1080 by 566. Okay, and that would be at 72 ppi. Okay, and then that is pixels per inch. All right, and so that would show you, this would be the ratio then for that particular size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show my rulers. So if I do Command R on a Mac or Control R on Windows, I'll show my rulers, and also it's showing this in inches. So I'm going to right click this. Oh, I can't do it here, but later when we're not inside the crop preset, then we can right click and make that into pixels. But I'm going to drag this down, and I'm going to allow my guide to just snap here to that top, and a guide to snap here to the bottom. And so I'll know that those are going to be the guides that I need for the correct preset for the horizontal Instagram ratio. And I'm going to just get out of the crop. I don't want to crop it, so I'll say don't crop. But now I've got my guides in the correct places. So what I'm going to do is I'll create an object, for instance. So if I go over here, and first of all, I need to also go up to View, and I need to say Snap, and make sure that Snap to is set to Guides, and it is. So so that'll work now whenever I go to draw my object. So I'm going to go down here to draw this vector shape, and I will create this vector shape, and it should snap. It's not snapping to the edges though, because I didn't draw guides on the edges, but there's a way to deal with that. So I have this vector shape, and I can tell it in the properties panel to be exactly 1800, because it's 1800 for my whole document width, and then for the height it's already set properly because it was snapping. Now you might look at that and go, wait, you had set I had told you before to set the ratio in width and height, and to set it to 1080 by 566. Well, this is one of those weird things that that the preset will do, is that it will still make it as big as it can make it, right? And it didn't make it really small like it could have done, right? And so what it's doing here is it's doing the same correct ratio. So anyway, and I want to make sure that yeah, the X is starting at 0, so it's not starting, you know, like 1 pixel into the document, or 1 pixel off or something like that. And then this will be correct, right? And so now I've got this shape, and if I go back to my layers, whoops, yeah, I can call this Insta, and we can call it landscape, or horizontal, or whatever you want to call it, landscape. Okay, and we'll just do that. And what's kind of cool is that if I wanted to make a setting, like I showed you before, where you've got the other areas darkened and blacked out, then, and first of all, let's go ahead and change this so that the fill is not black. Let's change it so the fill is clear and that the stroke is black, I guess, so that we could see a stroke if we needed to have a stroke. Anyway, but I can take this and I can create a marquee path out of that. So let's do that. If I jump up here to Window, I can go to Paths, and because I currently have my Insta Landscape vector shape selected, and by the way, if you had it selected, if you're trying to select it like with a non-vector tool like the Marquee tool or something, then the path wouldn't show up. Let me just show you how that looks. So if I go to Paths, well, it's showing up now, but see how it won't let me click on this Marquee area right here? It won't let me do that. I need to actually use the Vector Direct Selection tool, or the Path Selection tool, sorry, and I need to select that path, and then I can create a marquee out of it, okay? And then what I can do from that point is I could, create a mask if I wanted. That's another option. I could create a mask from here, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and put a layer mask on there, and then with that layer mask, at any point later, I can just load that up, and I can use a crop tool without actually using the real crop tool. I can use the command of crop. So if I were to click on this and then go, just so you know in the future, if I click on this mask thumbnail and go up to select and then load selection, it's going to automatically choose the thumbnail of the mask that you had already selected in the channel. I'll say OK, and then you see it loads it for me. And then if you wanted, you could always go up here to image and then crop. That's another way of dealing with it other than having to go back and use the crop tool every single time. Sometimes the crop tool is not the easiest way to crop, believe it or not, I think. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. All right, so and then the other thing too that I can do now that I've got this marquee is I can go to select, and then I can say to select the inverse. And this is where I can basically just choose my foreground color is black, and I can go to my paint bucket, which is right there under the gradient tool, and I can I'll create a new layer and I will fill that. And then that way it'll show me the blacked out areas for Insta Landscape. All right, and so that's one of the ways, and I'll just deselect. That's how you can, set this document up so that you can easily figure out stuff by turning the eyeballs on and off. And I'm going to take both of these, and I'll go ahead and I'll put them in a new group, and I will call it Instagram sizes or something like that. I already have one here called Instagram sizes, but I'll just go ahead and turn the visibility of that off. So that's an easy way of doing it without having to do mathematics, right? So that's one option. Another way that you can do it then, let's go over here to, let's turn that off. Let's go over here to the crop tool again, and I'm going to choose, instead of 1080 by 566, I'll do, let's say 1080 by 1350. Okay, and then it's automatically going to do that scale. The other thing that you could have done is you could have just done a 4:5 ratio. That would be exactly the same thing you see. And so now what I'll do is I'll draw some guides that will snap here like that. And I'm also going to draw guides just to make it easy on the top and bottom so that it will easily snap when I go to draw my shape. I'm going to escape, or I'm going to get out of don't crop. I don't want to actually crop it. What I do want to do, however, is create a new vector shape. All right, and I will, as long as I've got my snap turned on, and so there's my shape. I'll go ahead and do a reversal here, give it a black stroke and an empty fill. And then while I have that shape selected, I will go into paths, and I'll take this and then I'm going to create a marquee out of it. And now I can jump over here to layers and I can create the mask. All right, and then I can also jump back over to paths again. I can select this rectangle and I can click the marquee again, and now I can select the inverse and I can fill that with the paint bucket. Let's go back over to layers, create a new layer, and we'll call this Insta Portrait, and we'll fill that. Okay, and if you wanted, you can also put the size next to it, 1080 by 1350. Okay, and then this one down here for the landscape, I'd mentioned that that was 1080 by 566. Even though technically this isn't 1080 by 566, it's like 1800 by 944. It's the same ratio, but 1080 by 566 is what it will ultimately then be optimized to. I'll deselect this. I'll turn the visibility of this off. And now here's the one that's a little bit trickier, where you go over here to the crop tool and you say, okay, well, let's do this the same way that I've been doing it. Let's go back up to the resolution and we'll say, okay, 1080 by 1080. Well, look what it did. Right? Remember before when I said, well, it's just gonna see that it's a 1-to-1 and it's gonna take up the entire space. I know it's not 1080 because I know that this document is 1350 tall. And if you wanted to double check, here, let's just get out of this, don't crop. You could go up here to image size. Yep, it's 1350 tall. Let's put it back on. Let's change this back into pixels, and you see it's 18 by 1350, right? So I know already that if I go here and I change this to 1080, like, okay, well, it's not doing 1080 by 1080, it's just doing 1-to-1. So really, it's up to you if you want to save it out larger, but no matter what, I have this issue where if I'm using my document in the way that I said I was going to do it, where I'm trying to make sure everything will fit in these overlapped areas so that I can just use this one file to output 3 different things, then I need it to fit not in this large space that would scale down, but I need to actually have it fit in something that's 1080 by 1080. So what I'll do instead is, this is where I need to do a little bit of math, and you might go, wait a second, this is 1080 by 1080. Well, it is not actually. It's because if you remember, my document is actually 1800 pixels wide. It's really 1800 by 944, so this height here is 944, not 1080. So what we need to do is a little bit of math, okay? So we do know that this is 1080 from side to side here, but it's the up and down part that's not 1080. So we would need to find our center point for the document, and it should snap for you right there. That's the center. And so, you know, the center, let's do some math real quick. Let's go to calculator. And if you look at 1350 divided by 2, right? So that should be at 675. Let's go ahead and change our units of measure to pixels instead of inches. And then if you were to zoom in really closely here, you would see that we do in fact have our center guideline at 675, right? It automatically snapped to the center on mine, right? Because I have snap turned on. So if you want to think about how to do some calculations manually, it's a good thing to know how to do this stuff manually, even if you're using a thing like Guide or whatever. Then what you would want to do is say, okay, well, all right, that's 675. So 1080 divided by 2, all right, it's 540. So if you would want to figure out where the top guide is supposed to be, you would basically subtract 540 from 675 minus 540 is 135. That means that my first guideline should actually be at 135 pixels, right? And so if we were to zoom in and make sure that we're getting it in the right place, remember you can also do this. You can also do this just by the way I showed you in the last in one of the other assignments. Yeah, so this is 135. So I can just come down here and I can drop this right there at 135. All right, and then if you do the math again, all right, we say, all right, 675 plus 540 is 1215. So the other guideline then should show up at 1215. So let's just go and drag this. Actually, let's zoom out a little bit. And let's go and find where the 1200s are, and it would be in here, right? So, and we can drag our guideline and drop it on 1215. Okay, and so those are our new guidelines. Now we can take our shape tool down here, and starting at these new taller guides, we'll pull this box out. And also you can make sure that you're going to the right guides by holding down that shift key, because that means it'll constrain it to a perfect square. And it should snap. And then if you look at the properties, you can see that it is exactly 1080 by 1080, and it is the correct square. All right, so we'll go back up to our layers, and we will call that Insta Square, and then we'll put 1080 by 1080. Let's turn the fill of that off. Let's put the stroke to black, and we'll make the fill transparent. And then what I can do is jump over here to paths again while that's selected. And remember, you have to have a shape or a vector tool selected while you're doing this. And I can load the marquee based off of that vector shape. And then if I jump back over to layers, I'll go ahead and I'll create a mask on this layer like that, a layer mask. And you'll see later why I want to do that. I'm just kind of saving you some work later by having you do that while it's loaded up already. And so I'm going to jump back over here to paths again, and I'll select that same square, and I'll go back to make it a marquee again. And in my layers, I'm just going to jump over here now. And if right now I've got this square selected, but what I really want is I want to go up to say select inverse, so that everything else is selected. And now I can go and create a new layer, and we will fill that with black, right? And so that is the space that's visible that would be for the square Instagram image. And I'm going to copy this and paste it here, so that you can see this really easily by just turning these on and off, so that you can kind of see where your stuff has to fall, right? So if I turn this on where it says Insta Landscape, and then I turn on Insta Portrait, and then I turn on Insta Square, you'll see that if I remove the Insta Landscape, you see that it actually shows more because it's only doing the Insta Portrait. So I'm going for the lowest common denominator, and so I want to make sure that my artwork is going to fit in the smallest space available, right? And so now I've got something here. I'm just going to get rid of my original thing that says Instagram sizes, all right, because I just showed you how to make this. I want to go for the thing that's like the lowest common denominator, and let's go ahead and just so you can kind of see this a little bit better, I'm going to turn the visibility or the opacity of the stuff on the sides down so that we can kind of see what's sticking out of it a little bit better. Let's turn this down as well, and you'll kind of see where they're overlapping. Okay, and now what I can do is I can resize my artwork based on that. All right, and so if I go, let's turn on all of my layers, just select the entire folders, okay, like that in the panel. And then if I do Command T or Control T for free transform, I can take that and I can grab the corner and click in the corner and start to drag and hold down Shift and also Option, and now it will scale from the center. And you'll notice before I do that, I'm going to just let up off my mouse real quick. You'll notice that the S is touching the edge of its bounding area, but the E is not. So what I might do is, instead of just doing it from the center, let me hold down Shift only, and I'll get these so that they look like they're about even. And those look like they're about even centered. Now I can click and hold down Shift and Option and make it smaller, right? So the other thing that I might want to do is I might want to move it down a little bit. So I'm using my nudge keys and I'm moving this down a little so that it, yeah, so somewhere like in there, right? And then I just hit the Enter key or the Return key and it commits to it. And so now you can see that my artwork is in new location and that it's going to fit inside of any and all of these. So you can see, for instance, let's turn the opacity back up. I guess I need to take the lock off after all. Let's turn the opacity back up on these guys. We'll turn the opacity up to maybe 80 something percent, right? And you can see that it fits just fine inside of all of these. So that shows you how you can set up a single document so that it can still output from multiple formats, all right, and still use basically the same artwork. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. I'm going to move on to the next video from here.